What is going on, gunfighters? Got an interesting episode today. Gunfighters in Canada. Guns of the Great White North. Sadly for a lot of those guys, their options are severely limited. This applies to more than just Canada. A lot of these laws you'll see similar in many states. Sadly, here in the U.S., certain restrictions on shall not be infringed. So this episode is going to be my thoughts on some of the best options for Canadian gunfighters, for well-armed people who want to be able to defend themselves with the options available. Also, secondarily, maybe it's a good thought experiment for all of us. Or maybe if you're traveling to one of these places, or maybe you live in one of these places like California, or you have a brother and you want to give him advice. Even if you're not from the Great White North, you might glean from this episode. So, Guns for Canada. Welcome to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about guns and gunfighting the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. I am blessed to serve you today as host, Michael Milito. First and foremost, a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. Yeshua HaMashiach. Also, military, law enforcement, private contractor, competitive shooter, professional big game hunter and guide. Enough about that. Let's get into Guns of Canada. Now, I should mention that I'm not a lawyer. I don't live in Canada. I've been to Canada. It's beautiful. And their laws are fairly fluid there as far as firearms go. These are the laws as I understand them. Obviously, this is not telling you what is legal for you to have in Canada. You should make sure, especially because it may change by the time you listen to this. But what I would recommend, so far as I know, if you haven't been keeping up with the Canada, I believe all handgun sales and transfers have been banned. Sad day. Brings us to long guns. The three big categories we're going to discuss today: center fire rifles, rimfire, and shotgun. Now, so far as I understand, most semi-autos are banned. If it is a semi-auto that's not banned, it's limited to 5 rounds, I believe. From what I understand from some Canadian patrons, and it's one of the cool things about Patreon, they get to ask me stuff like this all the time. So if you'd like to ask me questions on your situation or whatever, and you value the advice, consider becoming a patron. But anyway, we're talking about this in the chat. I have a couple of Canadians I'm blessed to converse with as patrons. And they're saying that ARs and SCARs are prohibited specifically by name. The SKS is allowed. The SKS doesn't get a lot of love here, I don't think, but it's a phenomenal rifle. I think it's very underappreciated. There was a time when they were really, really underappreciated, and just a really good deal. They're still a good deal. I think even at $400 or $500, I still think you're getting a good rifle for that money. There was a time, sadly, not too long ago, where you could have gotten them for $175 or so. But as my wife likes to point out to me, them be the pre-COVID prices. And we don't live in pre-COVID times or pre-COVID money. They cost what they cost now, right? And I don't think that Mother Russia is going to be stamping out a lot of new SKSs. So, they cost what they cost. They're still a good value at $400 or $500. The SKS is a phenomenal rifle. It's a really good crossover rifle. When I was growing up as a poor boy in the South, it was kind of the de facto redneck deer rifle. Not because they were the greatest, right? Because they were cheap and effective. And I think for a lot of those same reasons, Canadians in the chat were telling me they're real popular among the natives in the Great White North for putting meat on the table. They're great for that. The 7.62 by 39 is, in my opinion, it's probably, in my opinion, the best, honestly, intermediate cartridge. I think ballistically, round per round, letra por letra, it is more effective than the 5.56. You could argue that, and people have to ad nausea, but just in my opinion, it's probably the best intermediate round. It has some issues. There are some disadvantages to the 5.56, but there are also advantages. It's a good intermediate cartridge. The SKS is good. Their SKSs, although most SKSs are 10 round, which is a good for an all-around rifle, like hunting and defense or whatever, 10 round, stripper clip fed, integral magazines. The Canadians, I believe, are limited to 5 rounds. They do some kind of thing where they limit the magazine capacity to 5 rounds. So that's still, it's not great, right? It's 5 rounds, but it's still decent. You still get a semi-auto rifle with 5 round capacity. The SKS is still, even limited to that, is still a good rifle. It's still semi-auto. You still get the ability for fast follow-up shots. It's still reliable. It's still got good sights. It's still a good weight. It's still a good balance. In my opinion, I kind of wish, I saw one recently, one of those guns I kind of wish that I had bought, but I'm not a gun collector. And like I'm blessed to have a SCAR and an AR-15 and several good bolt-action hunting rifles. So at what point in this apocalypse that may come would I be down to the SKS? I don't know, but they're just such a good rifle. And if you're looking for a good all-around rifle, it checks so many boxes so affordably. Like it would be a decent truck gun. It's a decent deer hunting gun. It's, again, growing up, that's what a lot of people use because it's what we could afford. It's a great defensive rifle. It was made for war. It's a war fighting rifle. It's semi-auto. It's a good rifle. They're not known as unreliable. They're not known as jam-o-matics. And I got to imagine a lot of people that have them because of what they paid for them really underappreciate them and don't really maintain them well. You say what you want about the Russians and their economic philosophies and their governmental philosophies, but those communists, they made some good guns. Now here is a unique thing as they explained it to me. And again, you have to double check all this stuff by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. PCC, so pistol caliber carbines in Canada are limited to 10 rounds. So you'd get 5 rounds of a modern Spitzer bottleneck rifle cartridge, like 7.62 by 39, which has some real advantages. But if you go to a PCC, you get 10 rounds. Interesting. It's an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought experiment to force myself into. I guess it really goes into philosophy of use. But my mind thought of, okay, so I get a 5-round SKS, but if I go to pistol caliber, you could have, let's say, a 10-round high-point carbine. And you start scratching your chin and thinking, would I rather have a 5-round SKS or a 10-round 10mm high-point carbine? It's a very interesting. It really is. Do you want the firepower? Do you want the capacity? Do you want power? Do you want longer range? Do you want faster reloads? Like, what is important to you? Like, do you live in downtown Ontario? Or do you live in the bush of Alberta? They're very different places. That probably would skew you one way or the other, right? But that's an interesting thought experiment. Let's just say for a truck gun, if you were picking between those two, would you rather have an SKS with 5 rounds? Or would you rather have a high point 10mm carbine with 10 rounds? You answer that for yourself. Even if you're not in that situation, it's a good thought experiment, and it's a good way to look at firearms purchases. Not what's the next cool hot Cerakoted thing that some gun pusher is pushing on you, because you got to have it, because if not, you're so out of date with the guns of yesteryear. But like actual practically thinking about guns. Which would be better for you? How about where you live right now? If this is a thought experiment. I know it's not really realistic, but bear with me. If it got annexed by Canada, if we made a deal, Canada got whatever place you live in, and those laws applied to you, which one would you pick? Would you pick a 10 millimeter, 10 round PCC, or would you pick a 5 round SKS? And I just picked 10 millimeter because it was the most powerful common one that I could think of. But you'd also get, 10 round 9 millimeter. And 9 millimeter's got a lot of the advantages. It's, if you want to train with it, it's affordable, right? It's effective in a handgun. It's going to be much more effective if you're smart about your projectile construction and selection. Can be even more potent in a carbine because you get more barrel length, you get more velocity, you get more power. That's how that works. As long as you're not going to get around that that underpenetrates because it overexpands at higher velocities. If you're judicious about your selection and how it performs in a carbine, then that's even a more potent round. So something like a Kel-Tec sub 2K with a 10 round mag, like your Glock 26 mags, or their 10 round factory mags, good mags, 10 rounds of 9 millimeter. It's nothing to sneeze at. I imagine that much as people love the bolt actions of like World War I, if you were storming trenches, your actual life depended on it, and you could travel back in time. And I said you could have this bolt action Mauser 98 and 8 millimeter giant cartridge, but bolt action, or you could storm the trenches with a Kel-Tec sub 2K 9 millimeter quick reload magazines, 10 rounds at a time. Compare it to an AR-15, it's not that great, but when you compare it to non-semi-autos, it's quite a bit of firepower, right? Just another thought experiment inside a thought experiment. Compared to a not semi-auto, 10 rounds of 9mm with a quick magazine change, that's not nothing. Also, there's the Aero survival carbines. I've never owned one of those. They've been around a while. They seem to be okay. They make one in a 357. So that's a pistol caliber, although it's bottlenecked. You get more velocity. Interesting there. Also, I don't know how Canada views 5.7. I don't know, because it's both a pistol round, right, and a rifle round. I don't know which one they consider that, but that's also an interesting thing to consider. I don't know that I would choose that over like 10 rounds. If I was limited to 10 rounds, one of the great things about the 5.7 is you can get so much in a magazine. I'm not saying it wouldn't be on the table, but if you're looking at 10 rounds of 5.7 versus 10 rounds of 10 millimeter, right, you kind of lose a lot of the advantage. The big advantage of the 5.7 is you get like a 50 round standard magazine on a carbine. But it's an interesting thought. So your PCCs, 10 rounds, semi-auto. And then you would think about your non-semi-autos, both in pistol and more traditional rifle calibers. Like your lever actions and your bolt actions are going to be your two most common. But before I talk about those, a really good all-around rifle, and especially for Canada with the megafauna that you guys have there, the Remington 760 in either 30-06, which I think was probably the most common, or a 308. It's a pump action. Aside from a semi-auto, it's probably your fastest option for most shooting positions. A pump action, or slide action, I guess to be technically correct, 30-06 with larger capacity magazines, right? That's an intriguing thing there. Even more, it's a good rifle for here in the States. It's a good hunting rifle. It's called, I believe, the Game Master. It's a phenomenal, quick handling hunting rifle. If you're not talking about, the kind of hunting that's in vogue today where you shoot 1,000 yards away off a tripod. If you're talking about spot and stalk and still hunting or drive hunting, it's still a great choice. And if you look at that in a world where you can't have a lot of semi-autos, that 760, that's a good choice. It's really the only pump action that was really popular and reliable that I know of. And a reputation for being accurate, I think, and powerful. Came in other cartridges too. The 270, a great cartridge, very powerful, much more powerful, the 30-06 270, I would say, than 7.62x39. That's an intermediate. We're talking full power rifle. Also, you get into your lever actions. And traditionally, lever actions are a lot of your straight-walled cartridges, like a 45-70. But also your pistol calibers, your 44 Magnum, your 357. And I would assume, have no magazine limit because they're not semi-autos. You know, a lever action 357/38 special or a lever action 44 Magnum /44 special, that's a really good choice for, I think, for Canada. They're light, they're quick handling. They're not as fast as a semi-auto, but you know, go watch a cowboy action match, and those guns have had special things done to them, and a lot of times they shoot less powerful ammo, but you can get an idea for how quick you can run a lever action. They're fast. And also, there are less traditional, I guess the first one of this would be the Winchester 1895, which they still make. It was used in World War I in 7.62x54R, which is, let's just say, similar to a 30-06. Very powerful cartridge. They still make that today. You can get it in 30-06. They also make the Henry Long Ranger, which is all I'm going to say about it. And they also make the Browning BLR, which is the way that I would go. The Browning BLR is available in all kinds of calibers. They even make a takedown version. In fact, it's a rainy day in Alaska right now. I'm looking out the window at some beautiful scenery. Almost went with the Browning BLR in 30-06 takedown for remote Alaska hunting. I ended up not going that way, but it really was on the table for a while. It's a fantastic rifle. They're lightweight with a lot of power. You're talking, 30-06 super versatile, especially in Canada where you do have the big game. You're not talking about somewhere like Florida. You're talking somewhere with moose. 30-06 is a fantastic cartridge. The Browning BLR, it's a good option. It's fast handling. You can get, not just in that caliber, if you wanted to go smaller, you could get it in, let's say, a fast handling 223, especially if you lived in more wide open places where you did want that less powerful cartridge. You decided you really wanted a 5.56. It's a good option. The Browning BLR, if you wanted that modern rifle round, and by modern I mean like well over 100 years old at this point, but a Spitzer pointed bullet and a bottleneck cartridge. And if you want to go halfway there, the 30-30 is about halfway there, late 1800s. It's got a bottleneck cartridge, but not a Spitzer bullet. You can put it in the more traditional tube-fed magazines. 30-30 is a phenomenal round. A lever-action 30-30 is, I've heard, called the redneck assault rifle. It's got a decent amount of firepower. It's not what we think of. I say we. I think the tactical gun world, when they think of intermediate cartridge, you think of 7.62-39, you think of 5.56. You don't generally think of 30-30, but I would submit that 30-30 from a ballistic standpoint absolutely is an intermediate cartridge. You talk about a really good all-around rifle, that lever-action 30-30. There's many rifles, but the two most common by far are the Winchester 94 and its clones, and the Marlin 336 and its clones. Either one of those rifles, depending on if you want really lightweight and fast handling, or if you want more ability to mount an optic and a more robust receiver. But either one of those, and again, if you're going back to, you live in the States, like you live in New Jersey, or New York, or California, for a truck gun, instead of some abomination Franken AR that's an AR in name only, would you be better served with a lever action 30-30? That's a decent amount of repeatable, decent rate of firepower, a good intermediate cartridge. 30-30 lever action, it's a beautiful gun. There's a reason they're still around and still being not only used but manufactured with all these high-tech space age widgets and the world of ARs, where ARs are so cheap and affordable. There's a reason companies still make lever action 30-30s. They're a great gun. I'm not telling you that, you should start kicking down doors with lever action 30-30s. That's not what I'm saying. But if you can't have an AR or a SCAR, it is a decent amount of firepower. Rate of fire is decent. Round per round effectiveness is decent. It's not going to be as fast as a semi-auto, but lever actions, if you're good with them, you can run them fast. And then what about your bolt actions? I have to assume that because Canada was part of the British Empire for so long, it maybe technically still is, but I think in ceremonial and name only. But I have to assume that there are quite a bit of infields there, as the infields were so popular for so long in all parts of the British Empire. Enfield's not a bad gun. You talk about bolt action, you get like a jungle carbine. 303 British is not cheap anymore, but it's still a good versatile round. And if you're going to run 303 British at this point, you probably should get into reloading. I got to imagine a lot of those, especially when they were dirt cheap and underappreciated, were sporterized. A sporterized thing, if you're on a tight shoestring budget, you can find a sporterized gun that was done well, because some were done well and some were honestly hack jobs. But if you can find a really well done, sporterized, lightened, shortened, but still kept the really good sights and everything, Enfield, and you want to reload, 303 British, it's not the best round, but it's plenty powerful enough. I'll say that for it. Many other bolt action rifles, and for this, you might be familiar with the scout rifle concept. I have never owned a scout rifle. It's one of the things, if you listen to the guns I would like to get or guns I want episode, I would like to get it just to run it through its paces. I have what I would consider very practical rifles that are set up very similar to scout rifles. My go-to Alaska rifle is a pre-64 Winchester 30-06 featherweight, 7.5 pounds. It's mounted with an LPVO. Much of the same things, and it's mounted with a Rhodesian sling. Much of the same things that people tout for the scout rifle is similar to that rifle. And even before that rifle, when I was a professional big game hunter and guide, my go-to hunting rifle was a Kimber Adirondack in 6.5 Creedmoor, sub 5 pounds. And then I mounted an LPVO, not some giant, what I would consider giant 3-9 or high power scope, with all the different animals and beasts that I've slain. I usually run an LPVO. That's how I hunt. I spot and stalk and still hunt, if I can. It's very similar to a scout setup. You might really look at the scout rifle setup, because if it's not a semi-auto, it's a bolt action, then you don't have that magazine limit. And a lot of these scout rifles, you can get a 20-round magazine. And that's intriguing. And this is really an interesting thought experiment, and I'm really kind of torn. Would you rather have a 5-round SKS or a 20-round scout rifle in 308 or 6.5 Creedmoor? That's interesting, because you get a detachable box magazine with your scout rifle, or you get an internal 5-round magazine. You can still, I don't know how they modify them, but I assume you can still reload the SKS with a stripper clip, which is pretty fast if you know what you're doing. But you get 5 rounds real quick with the SKS. Intermediate, not a lot of recoil, especially with the SKS, because it's fairly heavy for a lot of 7.62 39 rifles. But do you want 5 rounds real fast? Or do you want more power, longer range, more capacity with the scout rifle, but you have to run that bolt? Really, there's advantages and disadvantages to both, right? What if you only have one arm? I don't mean in life, I mean in this scenario. Your arm's been broken. You have a very young child under the other arm. You're dragging somebody, which is sadly a real thing, right? If you're dragging somebody away from a dangerous situation with one arm, and you have one arm with which to operate a weapon, then yeah, that SKS is a way better choice. You're not torn with, do I leave this guy here and let him bleed out while I run my bolt because I can't do both? Or can I drag this guy and keep my gun at the ready and continue to shoot at least a couple of rounds? It's, again, torn, right? And I thought about this for a little bit, thinking about this episode. And I guess here's what I would say. For a broad spectrum, and this is going to depend on environment, right? Again, going back to, do you live in the middle of the people hive of Ontario, or do you live in rural Alberta? Now, do you live in the Canadian Rockies in a town of a couple of hundred people surrounded by wilderness, which is a beautiful area, by the way? That might skew you one way or the other. It really, and logically, also may skew you versus, do you live in British Columbia or do you live in Alberta? Because that might skew you if you're talking about a scout rifle. Do you want a 308 or a 6.5 Creedmoor? And the truest of the scout people will say, no, only 308. But I'd say 6.5 Creedmoor at this point in 2023 is kind of the new 308. You might decide if you're in Alberta, wide open spaces, that the 6.5 Creedmoor is better for you. You may decide in British Columbia the 308 is better. But let's say carte blanche. And this is interesting, and I was thinking about this. 5-round SKS, semi-automatic intermediate cartridge, or a scout rifle. And here's what I think. I think that for the highly trained individual, that favors the scout rifle. If you're willing to put in the time and dedication, and I don't mean in researching what's the coolest scout rifle, I mean in running a scout rifle and going to a scout rifle or practical rifle class. I mean in learning your dope and your holdovers and your wind calls and your snap shooting and all that stuff. And not just that, also fieldcraft. Like how to hide, how to walk softly and carry a big stick, how to track, how to maneuver, how to fire and maneuver. If you're willing to put in the training and dedication, I'd say that favors the scout rifle. If you're just a dude that wants a gun in your truck, you're probably better off with an SKS. If you're the kind of guy that's going to shoot your SKS once or twice a year, you want something in your house, or you want something in your truck, or you're mostly... There's nothing wrong with that, but if you're not... Anyway, to put it politely, the scout rifle, I think, is better for the highly trained individual. And again, highly trained involves not just shooting. You could be a really good shot. I'm talking about not just the fundamentals, but fieldcraft and ballistics and training. Fieldcraft being a big part of that. For that, I'd say you're probably better off with the scout rifle. If you just want a decent defensive option in a centerfire rifle, without all those caveats, probably the SKS. Okay, and this is going to bring us, I think, to the other two categories. We're going to talk about the rimfire, which from what I understand has no magazine limit, and then finally the shotgun. So let's talk about rimfire. It's intriguing. It's an intriguing option. There's a lot you can do with the 10-22. You may decide that is a good choice. I'm not saying the 22 is great for defense, but I am saying that 22 long rifle kills a lot of people. You deduce from that what you want. And I would never advise somebody, again, start kicking down doors with a 10-22 over an AR-15. But what if you can't have that? I think you'll probably know my option that'll be talked about soon. But you can do a lot with the 10-22. If you're talking about prepping and survival, a lot of people here in America, the 22 long rifle is kind of their go-to anyway. It has a lot of advantages. You can carry a lot of ammo. If you do live in a more populated area and you think you may have to bug out on foot, you get all the same advantages there with a 22 plus a few more, right? You could have the 25-round detachable magazines where you can't have that legally with the AR-15, or you can't even have an AR-15. And then if we're talking rimfire, I'm going to write off the 17s. I don't know why you would ever choose one of the 17s over the 22, unless it was for specialized hunting. They have their place for prairie dogs, for coyotes and things like that, for fox. But we're talking like an all-around gun. I think the only other decent option you would have that's common would be the 22 Magnum. Now here's an interesting one. The Keltec CMR 30. As far as I understand it, and I could be wrong about this, the Keltec CMR 30 30-round 22 Magnum carbine would be legal. Okay, so you get 30 rounds of 22 Magnum. Now, 22 Magnum is not 5.56, but it's also not 22 long rifle. There is a appreciable gain in the amount of power of a 22 Magnum, especially out of a carbine, versus a 22 long rifle. So, again, you live in one of those urban environments, a Keltec CMR 30 rounds of 22 Magnum. It's not an intermediate cartridge, but again, it's not 22 long rifle, and 22 long rifle kills plenty of people. It's a decent cartridge for what it is. Now, there's also the Savage a series of semi-auto 22 mags. I don't know that they make high-capacity mags for them. Some aftermarket company might. But the Keltec CMR30, those have been out for a while. Now, anytime you get 22 Magnum in a semi-auto, you can run into issues. It's a long, skinny round, which is not great for feeding. It's also a rimmed round, which is not great for feeding out of box magazines. But if you get it and run it through its paces and know how to load the magazines properly and what ammunition it likes and doesn't like and feeds and doesn't feed, 30 rounds of something like a good bullet construction 22 Magnum in a carbine for a truck gun, that's a lot more intriguing there than it would be here in the U.S. Because, again, you can't have an AR with a 30-round magazine. You can't have something like that. You can't have your Scar 17. And, at what point do you look at that and think, that's my best option? So you get, again, it's a very interesting thought experiment when you force yourself into these, even if you're not in that environment. And the last category, and this was asked to me specifically by one of the Canadians. They said if you could have, and they listed a bunch of options in Canada, what would you pick for a truck gun? Well, I'll tell you the same thing I pick in America for a truck gun, because it's not in any of these categories. It's the shotgun. The shotgun is the best, most versatile tool, in my opinion, for most situations. I've said this story. You guys are probably tired of me hearing it, but I'll use it because it's a real-world example. I was law enforcement. I worked LAPD, regular street cop, and more specialized assignments. I worked all kinds of assignments. I was attached to federal agencies doing stuff. I did fugitive recovery. I had access to all kinds of weapons, fully automatic weapons. A lot of the time, when I was going into a hostile urban environment, I would choose a 12-gauge shotgun. Remington 870 with buckshot and slugs. Why? Because I didn't care Instagram wasn't even a thing back then, but I didn't care what looked the coolest. I didn't care what was on the cover of, Recoil magazine or any of that stuff. I cared what was most likely, logically, to keep me breathing when I threw the bad guy in cuffs and made it through the other side of that building. And that is a shotgun. Same thing with a truck gun. Nothing is as versatile as a shotgun. I think I'm going to do a whole episode soon on why no shotgun love. I think I know why. I think I have some really good reasons of why people don't love the shotgun more. I think people really take it for granted. But nothing at usual defensive distances or even usual hunting distances has the power and the flexibility of the shotgun. Even in America, even though I own a Scar 17 and I own several, actually now I only own I think one AR, technically complete AR, because the other one went to the wife. It was one of her favorites. She calls it the spanky rifle because she spanks the side of it to get the bolt to go forward. But even with those options, I usually run a shotgun as my truck, and it's the most versatile. 12-gauge deep penetrator slugs or Bernanke slugs are a phenomenal, anti-vehicle thing. And if it's my truck gun, I'm going to assume that I'm going to have to shoot through either my vehicle or somebody else's vehicle. That's a pretty legit scenario. Double-aught buck is a devastating round. My personal favorite, number 4 buck, is a devastating round. We think of them as low capacity, but let's say 9 rounds, which can easily be done with not even your crazy, which I would write off any kind of bullpup design shotgun or anything like that. For many reasons I got into with the patrons. But a traditional tube fed where you put an extension on it, let's say 9 rounds. 9 rounds of just regular old 9 pellet double-aught buck, that's 81 .33 caliber projectiles at about the same as pistol velocities. 81 9 rounds per pull of the trigger. And you're generally going to be much more fast and accurate with a shotgun than with a handgun. The handgun is by far the hardest gun to master, even though I love it. I think I love it so much because it is so hard to master. But as much as I love the shotgun, as much as I'm a several times over pistol champion, if you told me I had to get in a gunfight today to save somebody else's life, there's some weird caveat that I know about, I'm going to pick a shotgun. Maybe if it's really long distance, I'm going to pick a rifle. I'm not going to pick a handgun, even though it's the gun I have on me most of the time. I have it on me most of the time because it's what I can have on me most of the time. But as far as effectiveness goes, the shotgun is phenomenal. It's also the most flexible. It's unless, again, there's some caveat, like I have to walk 500 miles on foot, then maybe I'd go with the 22 long rifle. But it's my go-to, like, apocalypse, peanut butter and chocolate is hit the fan gun. Nothing else is as flexible. I can hunt a mourning dove and eat it. I can stop a charging grizzly bear and put it down. I can shoot birds out of the air. I can hunt geese. I can hunt turkey. I can hunt ducks. I can hunt deer. I can hunt elk. I can hunt bear. And it's a phenomenal defensive choice. The shotgun. I think it's still probably, unless you want something else, one of your best options for a truck gun, for a home defense gun, especially a home defense gun. You talk about the Kel-Tec PMR-30 is intriguing in Canada, but if somebody kicks open my front door and wants to do whatever they want to do to my wife, do I want a 30-round Kel-Tec CMR-30 22 Magnum, or do I want just a simple pump-action 12-gauge with double-up buck? I want the 12-gauge with double-up buck or number 4 buck. Look at it this way. You look at the pistol caliber carbines in Canada, you get 10 rounds. And I know it's not exactly 1-for-1, but you're talking with, granted they're a little bit heavier because they're not just a circle, but you're talking your entire magazine of 10 rounds. 35 caliber is 9mm, .355 diameter. Every pull of the trigger with that standard load, not even a Magnum, because a Magnum will be 12, just a standard 9-pellet double-up buck. Talking 33 caliber at usually a little bit faster velocity. 9 projectiles with every pull of the trigger. It's a devastating round. What problem? Because it's not like a handgun where it's often that people require multiple shots to be stopped. In general, with double-up buck or number 4 buck, they don't. What problem are you not going to be able to solve with, let's say, 9 rounds of 41 pellet number 4 buck? If I do that math right, that's 369 projectiles. Totally legal in all 50 states and in Canada. What defensive scenario, unless you're talking about really long range, which can't think of any long range civilian defensive justifiable shootings. I'm saying it could never happen, especially if the world dramatically changes. But in what scenario is 369 of those number 4 buckshot projectiles, or 81 if we just go with the standard 9x9, 81 projectiles of double-up buck? And what scenario is that not sufficient? And if it's not sufficient, it's probably because you are lacking, not the weapon. Let's just be real. The shotgun, the 12-gauge shotgun, and 20 gauge is great too. But I think because it is so available and so cheap and unrestricted, and let's face it, maybe not as sexy as some other options, that people just overlook it and discredit it because it doesn't look cool on the cover of Recoil magazine, or can't do a really fast bill drill on a piece of steel, but it's an absolutely devastating, versatile, robust weapon. As from the Count of Monte Cristo, my wife just read that book for the first time. Let neglect become our ally. They're not going after shotguns. They're not going after pump action or semi-auto shotguns, 12-gauge shotguns. They're an absolutely phenomenal choice. Again, even in times when I had access to full auto, like CAR 15s and M16s, I still would often choose a pump action shotgun. Best tool for the job. Are you in this because you want cool guns and flashy guns and cool Cerakote? If so, that's fine, but this is not cool Cerakote life. This is gunfighter life. If you want an effective tool, many times, if you're being honest and circumspect, it's the shotgun. Some other things I'd like to think about, and this is just how my brain works, I guess. As soon as this came up and I started thinking about this, I started thinking outside the box. With all the new cartridges coming out, why doesn't somebody, because I think this would also apply to California, because California is the same way with a centerfire magazine capacity. Why doesn't somebody just come out with rimfire 223 or rimfire 308 with all the new cartridges that people are probably going to forget about in a year or two, like 224 Valkyrie or 30 Super Carry or something like that. How about one of those for all the people that live in California, which is probably more than the entire country of Canada? And rimfire, like 22 long rifle, is not known for being super reliable, but that's largely because it's made to be cheap. If you made really good premium quality, which can even be done with the smaller rimfires, like Olympic quality ammunition, you could get, I don't see why you couldn't get, a robust design 308 or 5.56 rimfire. Especially if you did something like they did way back, I think, in the day with the Henry lever actions. You had a dual firing pin where it hit the rim in two different places, just in case. But something like that would be a pretty, seems like, easy way to do this. Say, okay, you can only have rimfires, and you say, okay, well, 308 rimfire it is. Of all the cartridges coming out, it seems like there would be a market for that one. I'm sure somebody would come out with an AR-10 rimfire, just re-engineering that bolt so that it had two different firing pins on the top and the bottom, or the 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. You get the idea. Somewhere where the extractor wasn't, but you get the idea. So, a bigger rimfire. Also, here's thinking outside the box. Come to America. This includes you Californians. Come to America. A place where your Second Amendment is not infringed as much. Think outside the box. It's easy for you to say, but I left California. Not from California, I moved there, but even as a cop, I didn't like the way that state operated. So I left, even though I've left behind a house and a good career. So it's not just easy for me to say, I did it. I'm here in Alaska right now. Let me tell you, it's a big, big state. If you're a God-fearing, devout Christian into personal defense, personal protection, you might look at Alaska. You might look at Idaho. Places like that. Anyway, that's some thinking outside the box. For your tactical tip of the day. We often think of capacity as a big deal and a way to increase effectiveness, but some of the big advancements in gunfighting, especially in the last 50 years, have not been the guns themselves. Or in capacity, you look at like the Snellfeuer Luger. Look how old that thing is. And that thing is more high capacity than most modern handguns. That's not a giant advancement. The big advancement has been in optics. Optics are a force multiplier for lots of guns. If you're wanting to be more effective inside those laws, instead of looking for some other things, maybe an optic. Right? A red dot on a shotgun is a force multiplier in many ways, just like the red dot on a handgun. If you decide to go the Kel-Tec CMR 30 route, put on, either, Trijicon RMR would be a good one. Be a good force multiplier for that gun. You're talking about a bolt action, scout rifle or something else, a really good LPVO is a really good force multiplier. So it's not all about the guns. The gun is part of a system. So think about that. If you're only allowed to have 5 rounds of your SKS, make it 5 really good rounds. Don't just make it some bulk Russian surplus ammo. Make it really good defensive, like the Hornady stuff in 7.62x39, or a good premium defensive round in 7.62x39. If you can only have 5 rounds, make those 5 rounds as effective as you can make them. Again, the gun is part of a system. And that's going to bring us to the tactical verse of the day. And this also is tying into a question, again, that a patron asked me. Tactical verse of the day. My normal go-to is the New King James. I'm going to be honest, it's not my favorite translation for this verse, but I'm going to go to it since it's generally my go-to first. You'll find this in the 19th chapter of Leviticus. You shall not go about as a talebearer among your people, nor shall you take a stand against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. NLT, New Living Translation, has it thus. Do not spread slanderous gossip among your people. Do not stand idly by when your neighbor's life is threatened. I am the Lord. Don't stand there while your neighbor's life is threatened. And this is a question that if you live in a country where sadly they don't recognize defense of human life as a legit reason to use a gun, do you still do it? Right? Well, here's the way I answered. I would rather be in jail than dead. And I, as a man, would rather be in jail than know that I stood idly by while somebody killed the life of a woman or a child or an old lady, while I stood there, idle, just watching while somebody killed a person. That's not the kind of man I am. I don't think that's the kind of man God's called me to be, and I hope it's not the kind of man that God has called you to be. Do not stand idly by if somebody takes the life of your neighbor. Every man should think about that for himself, I think. But, well, guess what kind of man are you? It is also written in Exodus, I believe 22, I don't remember the exact verse, but it is written, if a man is caught breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. The Word of God should be our authority and our instruction in life. The highest authority is God. You should know the truth. You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. What kind of man were you created to be? Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.